Hello, and on today's Steer Your Career podcast, I have Dr. V Boykin from HubSpot. She is a senior program manager of leadership onboarding and team lead. We'll talk a little bit about how I met her at HubSpot Inbound. This is the first guest that I am aware of that is both a formerly incarcerated individual and a former stripper. And we talk a lot about the systemic biases that women, people of color, face and some of the challenges that Dr. V has had with her criminal record and how she had to navigate that, and some good recommendations of how to handle that if that is a situation that you're in. But if it's not impacting you, just being so cognizant and conscious of people that are no longer serving time but still doing time after getting out there. So kudos to Dr. V for plowing ahead and also forging her own path. I learned a lot from this conversation. I know you will too. As a reminder, if you are looking to own your career, if you're looking to get a better job quickly, confidently, and with lots more money, that's what we do best at Kadima Careers. So we help you with either a personalized coaching program where we work with you with one of our world-class coaches, and we guarantee you a better job. We will work with you until you get that better job. And we also have group coaching as well. If you need a little bit less direct support, but you still are looking for that accountability, community support to help you get more interviews, more offers, and money. So go to our website at kadimacareers.com, Kadima careers.com, all one word. Check that out. Also, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn, shoot me DMs there. I respond to all. So with that, the last three words I shall leave you with before we get into this great conversation with Dr. V are: own your career. Hello, Acceleration Nation, and welcome back to another episode of the Steer Your Career podcast. Today, I am very fortunate to have Dr. V Boykin on the pod. I met Dr. V at HubSpot Inbound last year. At Kadima Careers, we are a big user of HubSpot. So if HubSpot ever wants to sponsor this episode, we'll take some sponsorship or at least some deal off of our very expensive contract. But that's not why I invited Dr. V here. I attended Dr. V's presentation at HubSpot Inbound last year and was very impressed with her tell it as it is approach, really clearly communicating some topics that I was not aware of, other people in the audience were not aware of, and just shedding some light on how it is to be an underrepresented minority in the tech space. And that's what people are referred to at a lot of these companies. So Dr. V has a really interesting, impressive background. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. V, to share with our audience a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, well, I first noticed you as the white man that was leaving my presentation when I started talking about white men. And my husband said, I saw him too. Do you think you went too far? And I was like, potentially, but the other women liked it. So I guess it's okay. So that was my first thing. And when you reached out on LinkedIn, I was so grateful because I really wanted to capture that feedback. Like, how did it hit you and how did it strike you? Because in my research, which is focused on the social support systems that allow women in tech to obtain and retain leadership positions, one of the things I found out, much to my surprise, is that it was white males that were really the heroes of women advancement, right? Women showed up with the skills, talent, and ability, but white men, after the path was cleared, are the ones that laid the pavement, making it an easier trip. So I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, and I think I clarified this, but the reason why I did leave is because at HubSpot Inbound, they pack so much great content in such a small period of time. And I think I was ducking out there to learn how to buy ads on LinkedIn because there was something that I attended there. But I did attend as long of your session as possible. So it was not because I felt uncomfortable. I was actually learning a lot in your presentation, and I really appreciated some of the things you were talking about. One of the things that I remember talking about were microaggressions and how that impacts women of color in the workplace. And actually, we didn't even say where you work. So you did happen to be speaking at HubSpot Inbound, but share with the audience a little bit what you do for your day job.
Sure. I have the privilege and pleasure of being a senior program manager that's in charge of go-to-market leadership enablement. So I take care of the onboarding as well as our coaching programs. So it's a very exciting space to work in because I'm directly shaping how our new leaders are viewing their role and responsibility at HubSpot. So I truly see it as an equity play. That's why I'm passionate about enablement. If you can deliver an incredible training program, you can hire more diverse candidates. And that's one of the things I'm passionate about. That's my goal because it increases profits by 15 to 35% and because it's the right thing to do.
Yes, for all those reasons. You're leading sales or you're have a managerial role in sales enablement at HubSpot. So you're helping to influence how the salespeople communicate the product and the opportunities out into the marketplace. Is that a fair summary?
My focus last year was definitely directly on how our sales teams were getting training. And now it's how the leaders of our sales and CS teams are getting their training. I want to go back to something you said earlier because I had told myself this whole story about why you walked out of my presentation, right? And brought others along with me. Like it's pillow talk with my husband and I. And it really goes back to one of the things that makes it tough to be a woman in tech. And when you add intersectionality, right, the converging of two marginalized communities on top of it, a Black woman in tech, we tell ourselves these stories, and a lot of them are based in actual events that happen. So you did walk out of the room. The other side of that coin that women face a lot that I found in my study is 95% of the women in my study said they had been told to be more and less assertive, right? So it's always this tape playing in the background. Did I go too far? Did I not go far enough? Should I have smiled more? Did I look pretty? Right. And that's the other layer of things that we're dealing with as women, and certainly even more as we look at the intersectionality that comes into play.
And it's interesting that you talk about like our thoughts and like what your thoughts were. And I don't know, I don't know if I feel better or worse that I'm the source of pillow talk of for you. I'll tell my wife later and we'll see how.
Yeah. Let me know what she says.
But it was actually very interesting to hear your perspective in more detail here because I was thinking, I knew I was going to leave that session because I knew that I wanted to go to this other thing where LinkedIn was supposed to give me $1,000 credit, which they have not given me yet, by the way, to attend this event. But I was thinking about sitting in the back of the room so I wouldn't be noticeable when I left. But my eyesight is not good. I haven't taken care of my glasses yet. I couldn't see your slides. So I had to come up to a spot where I could see and also hear you engage. So I came up closer into the room and then I was more noticeable when I left.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, especially as I'm giving speeches on challenging topics, one of the things that's important to me is to make sure that I'm honoring the humanity of all in the room, right? This is not a me versus them. This is not a you're bad and I'm good conversation. This is a conversation about equity, and equity improves performance. It decreases expensive attrition. Equitable experiences in the workplace increase productivity. And when you think about 43% of new mothers in tech, first-time moms in tech, are leaving the workforce. But then you juxtapose that with the 21% gap in profits when you don't have a diverse executive team. We have to work together to solve this because I don't know of any company that's like, hey, I'll give up 15 to 35% profit. I don't need that this year, especially with the macro environment for tech right now.
For so many reasons that you allude to, it makes sense to hire a diverse workforce for lots of reasons. And there's lots of different sort of diversities that we'll go into. Why do you think companies are not doing that? They're talking a big game. You can go to equality.com. That is a website, a URL that your competitor, Salesforce, actually spent a shit ton of money for.
Never heard of them.
So the companies are talking a big game. They're not walking a big game in most cases. If the economics make sense, if it's the right thing to do, if they're marketing this message, why do you think it's not occurring as quickly as it should be?
Number one, I'll say I think HubSpot's doing a really good job in this space. And I've actually been impressed by some of the initiatives that Salesforce has had as well. However, when you're talking about creating space for other people, either you're expanding the number of seats in a room or you're giving up a seat in the room. And it's a tough conversation, one that I know you're familiar with, when it's, I'm going to give up my seat. Like it sounds great until you're the one that's getting up and leaving the room and leaving behind potentially that paycheck. The other thing is, I think that the companies that are doing it well have missed some of the focus that makes their efforts pay off, which is the belonging piece. Because you get us there, but then you're not quite sure what to do with us. And what I mean by that is When you are from a marginalized community, you tend to lead with your accomplishments. So I would probably start this podcast and say, I'm Dr. V Boykin. I have a BS in marketing management. I have an MS in organizational leadership. I have an MBA, and then I have a doctor of business administration in organizational leadership. When I go into meetings, I want to lead with the similar credentials. Or my last program that I stood up got a double-digit increase in X factor or achieved an 8% delta from a drop to a raise. I want to lead with that. I don't want to talk about Block Island. I don't want to talk about Martha's Vineyard. I may not get back in this room, but what that also does is it gets you labeled as assertive, aggressive. Please don't call me angry. I say that every time. And you're talking about my attitude more than my accomplishments. So if every year of my career, and I consider myself talented, I've been told to fix my face or adjust my attitude, what does that say about really what you mean by belonging? Because I didn't have an upbringing where I smiled a lot. When I was in prison, smiling wasn't high on my list. When I was stripping, smiling wasn't high on my list. Well, actually it was, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
But when you think about that and all that it takes to get here, you know, when my events with my children were, hey, let's count how much money, including the changes in mom's purse, that experience is going to have me showing up different in meetings. So when you say belonging, you really have to understand that that means belonging for the masses, not just the people that you summer vacation with or that are from your same region.
And I really appreciate your vulnerability and transparency, Dr. V. We're talking about being formerly incarcerated, also your stripping career. I think you're the first person on our podcast to be a formerly incarcerated person and the first former stripper, or at least the first one that has admitted to that. And definitely the first one that has that Venn diagram. So more so on the incarcerated part, if you want to share a little bit of the story, you can, of the context of that. And then I'm more curious about how, after you have put in your time there, how you have been hindered probably afterwards of accelerating your career.
It's interesting because this month is the first time that I've ever publicly talked about it. This is marriage number 4 for me, which is really great because my last divorce got me 4 degrees. So there's that. But there's people that I've been with for 10 plus years that they knew, but none of their friends and none of their families knew. This is a very closely kept shame. It's not something I'm proud of. I made bad decisions. I would tell everyone starting out in the workplace, never get a rubber stamp and never rubber stamp anything. Do not ever sign your boss's name on anything. Just don't do it. Period. End of story. End of discussion. It definitely results in me being very aware of everything my managers say. And it takes a great deal of trust for me to relax into a work environment. We'll figure it out is not something that I operate with. It makes me appear more rigid. Again, when you talk about belonging, I'm somebody that, while I don't like a lot of structure, because I like a lot of green field, I do like a lot of very quantifiable and specific directions and projected outcomes. Coming out of that experience, I mean, I couldn't even get a job at a gas station, right? So I started my own business, but prior to starting that business, it was in dog care and I became a dog behaviorist, but I was picking up dog poop for minimum wage, sometimes below minimum wage. I had a 80-year-old white male colleague. I was making $8 an hour and he was making 11 because the white man that owned the dog place that I worked said he had a family. Meanwhile, I've got 2 small kids and I'm on my own. But you know, there's still that bias that exists. And there are places now that I can't live in Scottsdale, Arizona, because felons are not allowed to live in that zone. There are apartments I couldn't, dead serious. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a place right by my former employer, which was Groupon, that I could not live at. I had a record. We're talking 20 years ago. And then we were talking 15 years ago, but it didn't matter. Felons were excluded from being able to live. So you can't even live there, no matter how long. There's states I can't vote in. There's businesses I can't work for. Every time I fill out a job application, it doesn't matter what my qualifications are. I'm sweating. I'm worried. It makes me guard my employment more. It makes me work harder. Number 1, because I feel I have something to prove. And number 2, because of the challenge of getting another employment opportunity. And you're talking to an employee that has been rated a 5 at HubSpot, that's established new revenue streams. I'm good at what I do. This will always haunt me. And I also have to say, I'm guilty. I did these things. Do I feel I was punished appropriately? No. Do I feel I should have been punished? Yes. You know, when you have nothing but a speeding ticket and then find yourself like in Huntsville with murderers, it allows you to really understand the humanity of people. Human beings deserve to be treated and remembered as human beings. Even in the midst of our failures, I see good and evil as this continuum that we're all going to visit on this spectrum. And it's very simple to say, if you didn't want to have the consequences, you shouldn't have done it. It's also just as easy to say there's always extenuating factors, and I'm so proud of where you are now, and let me help you work hard and earn your keep and right into society.
Yes, I totally agree.
Thanks.
You talked a little bit about what happened there, and you're like, never rubber stamp something.
Yes,
To the extent that you feel comfortable sharing, what advice do you have there? What rubber stamping occurred? What should people
sure.
be wary of, and the potential consequences of?
Yeah, I worked in procurement. What I can say is that when everything occurred, it was myself and another Black executive assistant that things shook out wrong for. I can say that the prosecutor did have a noose hanging outside their office. It was reported in a newspaper article. I can say that expense reports are, how do I want to say this? When you are approving expense reports, many people don't go line by line and verify. By the same token, when you do see discrepancies, don't hop on that train. Don't participate. And if you think that your involvement and knowing about others' involvement will somehow save you at the end, like there will be this big sweetheart deal, there won't. When I said, well, what if I share other information? They said, we'll just take them down too, but you're still getting what you're getting. So I essentially was given, I had a speeding ticket. That was all that I had on my record. And I was given 2 10-year stacked sentences. At the time of sentencing, there was discussion about admonishments. I still don't know what that means. The world actually does slow down in that time. And then everybody scuffled about, and it ended up being a 3-year sentence, 2 3-year sentences that ran concurrently. In my particular case, they added to my charged amount the lights that were on as they researched the case, the cost of the binders, the cost of the pens, the cost of the copies, and they broke it up by years. So it was a terrible action that I did. It was a terrible mistake, and I do feel it was over prosecuted.
Wow. And coming out of that situation, all the challenges that you've had, even getting a job at like the gas
Yeah.
station, how do you know which sort of company, and you do need to disclose this information because most
Yes.
companies will do a background check upon hire. They
Yes.
will find this whether you say it or not. How do you know which companies to look for? Which companies have since hired you, since like you're at HubSpot now? Which other companies have hired you since then? And how do you even know, as a ex-convict of or formerly incarcerated person,
Ex-con, it's true.
which companies would even consider you?
You don't know. So this was in 2004 that I came out, right into the middle of the Super Bowl in Houston, which was extremely overwhelming when you're just trying to learn how to sleep in a regular bed again with space around you. But for me, you don't know. The additional legislation that limits it to going back 10 years helps. The ban the box where they cannot ask you about it until you actually have a job offer or in those stages, that helps. There's still income limitations. Like if you're going to make over $75,000 in California, then they can run a background check. But if it's under 25,000 in New York, like there's all of these different laws. You try and look for states that are more friendly. In the remote environment, it's opened things up because companies tend to go with the least restrictive state so that they're not in violation depending on where you work. There's websites. You don't know. The answer is you don't know. And every time you're making this decision, do I tell the truth or do I hide it? And depending on your level of desperation is usually how you make that decision. I was employed by Groupon. They didn't do a background check. I don't know if they would hire me if they knew that. I know I was a top performer. I know I opened up a revenue stream. I held no one asked.
Right. Don't tell which.
I was a single mom and you have to pay bills. And the last thing you want is to not get the opportunity to work hard. When you think about it, if a convict can't get hired at a gas station, which are usually on corners, which you can usually walk to, where can they get hired? The next time you walk into a gas station, have a little respect for that person. You probably know they don't have a criminal record. It's like you can't even live places. So it just makes it very hard. And when you look at the increased incarceration rate, and I'm not sure on the number, it was somewhere 8-1 or something like that, of minority communities, it's like, not only can we not make the same mistakes, we also can't rebuild. And it impacts more of us. So if you're over prosecuting, over incarcerating, over policing, and then over restricting the ability of people to rebuild their lives, I can't live places. It's 20 years later. I earn over 6 figures. Are you kidding me? So it's tough.
Groupon didn't ask you.
Did not ask me.
Amobi, HubSpot, do you recall, like, and those are the two places you've been at since?
They asked.
And I'm assuming you were nervous about checking that box.
You're extremely nervous, and it comes down to your moral character. Are you going to tell it? I chose to tell it. The background check is usually very separate from anyone in the company, so you never know if anyone in the company has it. And you definitely don't make plans to move until you've started your first day. You definitely don't quit a job like that 2 weeks notice. No thanks. Absolutely not, because this could fall through at any time. And for me, there's always a fear that you'll be outed. There's always a fear. And you think, HubSpot has over 7,000 employees. Statistically speaking, I'm not the only one that's been incarcerated. And I'm probably not the only one that's been a stripper. I would hope so. I would love that to be true, but typically it's not.
Right. Although the stripper thing, I doubt they can find on your background check, because I'm guessing you were probably not I'm guessing it's a lot harder for companies to find that out.
Alan, to be honest with you, I was such a go by the book type person. I got a license in Texas to strip. So it would be a public record somewhere. Yes, there's a license.
In Texas,
there's a license
firearm, but to strip, you need a license.
Really negative reactions to the way that I talked about my stripping experience, because it actually is one of the industries where women out earn men. Women set their own working hours. Many times women are the ones setting their own boundaries. Women are the ones that are deciding the financials, how much they want to tip, how much they don't want to tip, how much they want to invest, how much they don't want to invest. And our appearance, which is so critically judged all the time, can be tax deductible because it's our business. For me, in that experience, I was able to do the job sober. I don't know what that says about me, but I was absolutely able to do it sober. And I did feel powerful. It definitely introduced me to the world of sales. And it definitely was, because I had all my faculties, I felt very much in charge of the trajectory and the earnings that I was able to generate.
I'm sure you were successful at that. Sounds like
I was.
When you get interviewed for future jobs, when they ask you a behavioral based question of like, tell me about a time when you had...
That's not a time.
Yeah, you're not going to use that as a star story there.
But it would be a phenomenal one, because you literally create your book of business. Right? You generate return customers. You absolutely do a needs assessment. You absolutely uncover the pain. You absolutely use that to chart a path forward that has an exchange of monetary value. You are totally in control of your little business.
So talk a little bit about your presentation that you did. That I remember some aspects of it. Like I remember the most vividly was the microaggression part, but you talked about a lot of things there. Talk a little bit about what you were presenting a year back, and maybe if you want to talk about what you're thinking about presenting in future years at HubSpot Inbound.
Oh, thank you for this. So as I mentioned, like my work is literally the social support systems that allow women to obtain and retain senior leadership positions in tech. This bleeds over into other industries as well. And the simplest explanation of it is now science that women specifically, but not exclusively, should bring in resources for professional house cleaning, meal preparation services. They should absolutely have a mentor. Like these are things that companies could shift resources and provide. No more gym memberships, clean our house, send us Blue Apron, right? Send us HelloFresh, have our groceries delivered, give us a stipend towards these things, because women, since COVID, there's been a 38% decrease in work-life balance for women. And women, 80% of them in my study are doing chores in between meetings, which means they're not strategizing, which means you're not getting the full productivity out of that employee. The other thing that my study showed, which is just astounding, is number one, there's literally inept mentorship for women within the tech space. This is fact, right? It's inept. There are still gender microaggressions, including sexist language, humor, derogatory comments, that hinder women's experiences in the workplace, not even just STEM fields, but in the workplace. And then when you look at partner support, when I started this, 80% of the women tech leaders that were surveyed in Brew's 2019 study said it was their partners that allowed them to ascend the corporate ladder. It was their partners that had let them have these great leadership positions, right? And help them navigate that. And I thought, great. That's right up my alley. I've been married. I really like marriage. I'll just go tell all the women to get married. But then when I did my study, 89% of the respondents said they had been discouraged by their partner. So the math doesn't math. So then my question became, so what is it that a partner is providing that we could mimic? Because I don't want to tell women to get married, and I don't want to tell women not to get married. I want to tell women how they can be successful. On the other side of that, these social support systems apply to men, because when men find themselves with more time, right, they're just told to lean in more and work harder, right? Superman doesn't take a break. So they're under-familied and they're overworked as well. So there are simple things that you can put in place, especially because most of us are working remote, right? And so the idea is, if you didn't pull out a vacuum when you were in the office to vacuum the common office space, you shouldn't be pulling out a vacuum in your own home to do it. The idea is, if you would have been provided lunch as a perk at work, or there was a snack kitchen at work, then companies need to shift resources to provide meal planning services, grocery delivery services, meal kits. They did that. The reason that your company had snacks in the break room was so that you didn't take time away from your job to go get a snack, and so you could refill and be productive. So my work specifically bridges the gap between work-life balance and work-family balance in order to maximize productivity, decrease attrition, and increase profits. When we talk about microaggressions, if 95% of women in my study were told to be more and less assertive, and 43% of women that had their first babies leave tech, it becomes very difficult to create a diverse workforce. The other thing that happens is when companies talk about gender equality, they're typically talking about white women. And so I urge everyone that is listening to this podcast, the next time there's a company meeting, the next time they're in a team meeting, just look around and think about how many Black, Indigenous, people of color, how many minorities you see in the room, how many gender fluid people you see in the room, how many LGBTQ plus people you see in the room, which you may not see, but there's always that institutional knowledge that's around. And if you are a white woman, ask the question why you're surrounded by only white women. And if you're a white man, ask the question, why are you surrounded only by white people? Because I can guarantee you, those of us that are impacted as part of a marginalized community are so king tired of asking the question. We truly are.
You've had an amazing comeback, and you're continuing on like your upward trajectory. What do you think was different about you and your outcome? Not too many ex-strippers, ex-formerly incarcerated people wind up going on for their master's, their MBA, their PhD, get jobs at world-class companies. What do you think is different about your outcome? Not your outcome, but how you dealt with these adversarial
conditions.
Adversarial conditions. Thank you very much. And English is my first language. Like, what's different about you, or what influences did you have, or how did you turn out so successful when you had all these obstacles placed in your way?
Number one, shame is a huge motivator, right? And I have a Jewish grandmother, so I'm familiar with shame. But seriously, shame is a motivator. I felt so absolutely guilty that I had added so many statistics to the wrong side of the column. It wasn't just the incarceration or the stripping. I had 2 children by 2 different men who I did marry, but why does that even matter, right? I'd been on food stamps. I'd been on WIC. I had made bad decisions, and I just didn't want to leave the world worse. I didn't want to be harming my community. I also was coming out of a relationship with a white male, my only one that I had, where I felt I had been devalued. I felt trapped. I felt that the statement around the time of our divorce that I was too Black and too liberal was hurtful. And I think not valid, because how can you be too much of any of those things? How can you be too much of who you are? And for me, my motivation is I wanted someone else not to have to hide. You know, I wanted to open up the door. And in order to do that, I needed to have enough degrees where my imposter syndrome voice just quieted down a little bit. And I felt fairly certain that if I get fired for saying it, I probably could at least get a job at the gas station now. Maybe not. Still might not be able to. Felt that, you know, when you bring in diverse perspectives, you avoid things like airbags being deadly to women and not men when they first came out because they were only tested on men, or AI not being able to recognize BIPOC faces because there was nobody that said, hey, by the way, did we test this on a BIPOC person? Are we testing this on a Black person? You know, you get away from Alexa not being able to understand my voice sometimes, depending on the relaxing of my accent. So I think that I am fueled by nightmares, always have been, not dreams. For me, dreams were crushed repeatedly, but nightmares are fuel. And I like to sleep well. Therefore, you must take action.
I like that. Like the nightmares, the negative almost motivates you more to avoid
Yes.
that rather than trying to attain something that may or may not be attained. So it's an interesting
And,
perspective.
Alan, the other part of this is I'm a very light complected Black woman. That means I am in rooms where sometimes I'm not noticed if it's a day after my soap press. And you hear things that are disgusting. You hear things that are simple. You hear things that are unjust. And on the other side of that coin, I can also be very palatable to people that have a entrenched bias against Black people. So that comes with a privilege, and with privilege comes responsibility. So if because I am more palatable to certain closed-minded people, I can get in the room and say the thing and they can hear the thing better, I better get in that room. I have a debt, that an open tab that I willingly accept, that I intend to use to the greatest good.
And you have been.
Thank you.
So the world kind of
Mm.
sucks sometimes, and people
Yes.
suck, and there's going to continue to be these biases and racism and discrimination, whether it's
Hmm.
subconscious, conscious,
Hmm.
macroaggression, microaggression. How do you continue to motivate yourself to forge forward? And I guess some of it is running from those nightmares. And more importantly, what sort of advice do you have for people that are in your situation? Maybe not the same Venn diagram that you have, but whether people of color, women, anyone who is not often in that room. What advice do you have
Yeah.
for them in terms of dealing with these situations and taking control where they can and ceding control to what they can't control?
Yeah. Number one, I think the call to action differs depending on your career tenure. So if you are just starting out, you do not have to carry the banner. Like, let yourself off the hook. As you become more established, you have more social capital you can expend, spend it wisely. You don't have to pick every fight, but you do need to pick the fights that are important to you, the fights that will interrupt your sleep. I tell everybody, get a mentor, get an executive coach so that you are prepared before the situations occur. Because when microaggressions happen, I mean, I can think of one in a restaurant that was from 8 years ago when I was in Southern Pines, North Carolina, and I overheard this couple talking about those people, meaning Black women, and how dare she cut in front of her. And it was just a terrible conversation. And I said nothing. And to this day, it takes up space in my head. But you get that executive coach and you get that mentor so you can talk through what happens when you're in a meeting and somebody takes your idea. What happens when it's Black History Month and nobody likes your post and nobody wants to talk about it? What happens when people ignore your doctor title or another accomplishment? What happens when your accomplishments are minimized, even though they're quantifiable, so that you have these talk tracks ready? So that's one thing. You should have a mentor. End of discussion. When you have a little change, you should get an executive coach. End of discussion. You need to have that in place so you know what to say. Another thing I would offer is education truly is a pathway to equity. When I got my first degree, which was in 2018, in my 40s, my pay jumped over $30,000, but I was the same person. Yes, it's checking a box in some instances, but check the box. I also encourage, especially people from marginalized communities that don't have generational wealth behind them, get the degree the easiest, least expensive way you can. Just get it. And while the programs will vary in their intensity and how hard they are, you really want to look for something that's self-paced, and then you want to pace yourself. I'm a big fan of Western Governors University. I'm a big fan of North Central University. They're both online. They're both affordable. They both allow you to self-pace. I think that's important. And the third thing is shop for your manager, not your job. Because picking up dog poop when you have an inspirational leader that is invested in you is well worth it versus a manager that is out to get you, that will never say your name, that will never promote your work, that has other favorites and makes it not a secret. You can't win. You can't win in that situation. And you should not be spinning your wheels trying to. So shop your manager. And the last thing I will say is create a great partner, whether that's in physical form or not, because the wrong partner will tank you. And getting rid of the wrong partner will get you 4 degrees. But put in place the things that they would do. Get grocery delivery, because that's the same as saying, honey, would you pick up ketchup on the way home? get a house cleaner, because during that time that you're cleaning your house, you could be strategizing for your future. You could be working on school. It's expensive to do those things, but shift your resources, because a lot of us are remote. We're not buying pants, right? We're not buying as much makeup. We're not buying a lot. We're not spending the gas to commute. So reinvest that in yourself and do it wisely. That's what I would say.
How effective was I was just having this conversation with somebody, and I agree, managers can make or break your career
Yeah.
and your trajectory, not your career, can make or break your time in that job. And I do think managers have a disproportionate impact on your career
Yeah.
success. In terms of shopping for manager, my general advice is shop for the company that has a higher proportion of managers. Get into that
Mm.
company. And if you have a crappy manager, then you'll have a higher likelihood of finding a good manager there versus shopping for it externally when you may not know if the manager is good or not. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, like, how much insight did you have when you came to HubSpot in your first job as customer training manager, professional services? Like,
Yeah.
was it boss or was it HubSpot that led you there initially? And also with Groupon and Amobi, like, how much can you actually shop for the manager before getting hired?
Well, for me, when I did my interview, my second interview with HubSpot, because I didn't get on my first try, but I told them I'd be back, and back I was within 6 months. I started with a moment of meditation, and I waited to see how that was received. So for me, that was an indication of like, are we aligned in terms of how we approach challenging situations? And to her credit, Sarah McDevitt was very receptive to it. Brittany Talty was also on that interview panel, I believe. Both of whom are still at HubSpot. So there's that indication. The other thing, when I went to Groupon, Dave Harkinsey, this guy gets on and he's got like, I've been working by myself for 10 years because who could get a job anywhere else? And I built a successful business. And he's on there with like a hoodie and a hat. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Heard in his voice a respect, a positivity, an acknowledgement of his privilege and his investment in his people. So I think that it's not always easy to know when it's there, but you definitely know when it's not there. You definitely know that. I think for me, when I have a manager who is a person of color, or I see a manager who has invested in finding diverse talent on their team, it makes a difference. You know, Al Smith, as my manager now, has an appreciation, respect, and understanding for me that, I mean, I would do anything for him that he needed work wise. At 9 o'clock at night, he never has, but if he needed me to produce a paper, I'd be more than happy to do it, because there's that respect and mutual core foundational understanding as a Black man to a Black woman, which does not mean, again, I say again, white males were the hero of my research. They are definitely sponsors. They are the people that are building those bridges and connections because they're in those positions. So, in summary, my advice is show up authentically as your work self, bring your full work self to that interview, and watch how people respond.
And did I get you right that with your HubSpot interviews, you started with a moment of meditation in your
I
interview?
did. I did.
Okay. How often did you try that tactic before HubSpot? Because I don't know how that would land with all managers, and they could be very good managers. But
They could be.
I'm just curious how effective that tactic was for other interviews as well. Like, it worked for HubSpot, awesome, and your
Yeah.
great career there. But did you do that often?
I did it in two other interviews. One was a position that I did land, and another one was a position where I did get to third round. And it doesn't have to be real hokey. It's just like, hey, I'm super nervous. And with that, I'd like to just take a moment to take a deep breath, center ourselves, imagine that this is the most supportive environment that you could have, remembering that we're all here to allow the other person to show up as their best self, bringing forth their talents, skills, and abilities. And that at the end of this, we will all have learned something more about each other. And with that hopeful outcome, let us begin.
Wow, that's pretty ballsy for you to do. And
Well, I'm a convict. And it's
yeah,
like, is
but
there anything else to lose?
it comes across very authentic and it's working for you. And it also probably helps to select out people that you might not drive with all that well.
And if they don't jive with me, at least they have to call me doctor now, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Dr. V, this has been such an informative conversation, and I learned several new things about you today. And I'm glad we cleared the air of why I walked out.
Why you left?
I was not walking out on you, it was walking to another session. And by the way, tell HubSpot when you speak this year to
Yes.
have you on the center stage so that there's no like where Barack was and Reese Witherspoon,
Oh,
so that there's no other competing people, so I don't need to walk out.
well, hopefully I will get on the stage. I'd really like to talk about, do diverse candidates actually belong in tech? because I think that there's a crisis going on right now where we're not actually sure if they do or not. So it's time to really dive in and examine that. So I will let HubSpot know that I should be positioned next to Yamini, and we'll see what they say.
Is there a way for anyone in this audience to vote for you? Like, is HubSpot asking for feedback on any of these, or they're just evaluating it internally?
I believe they evaluate internally, but I'll be happy to do a LinkedIn post saying if you'd like to hear me speak. The one thing I want to do is we have a really great selection panel. They do such a fair and equitable job. I think that they look at topics and make good, sound decisions. But you can find me on LinkedIn, Dr. V Boykin, and on my website, drvboykin.com. And bring me in. I'd love to have uncomfortable conversations with your company.
Awesome. And yeah, and you can tell them that a big fan of yours and not that big of a customer for HubSpot, but I have 16K of ARR with them, with you guys, is strongly in support of a return from Dr.
Thank
Boykin.
you. I will let Kate know.
If you give me her information after, I will send a note on your behalf if you tell me who it is.
This is what we call sponsorship, people, and this is what is needed. It is a white male stepping up to sponsor. Thank you so much. I do appreciate it.
Session, and me walking out was no indication of the lack of quality of your session. It was just too much stuff packed at the same time. So anyway, so you told people where they can find you.
Yes.
And the last question I'll have for you here is, what is one last piece of sick career advice that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Be uncompromising in your excellence. Know your job, know your role, develop your skills. Make it hard for them to say no to you. That's your job. Make it hard for them to say no to you.
Awesome. And you've made it hard for people to say no to you so much. And I appreciate all that you do. And I look forward to seeing you inbound in Boston, hopefully on this stage again.
And that sounds great.
And thanks for all the work that you do and trying to call attention to some of these issues that are systemic biases that make it a hell of a lot harder for women, underrepresented individuals, formerly incarcerated, ex-strippers to succeed. And kudos to you for all that you've done to own your career and forge ahead and lift others up along the way. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Dr. V.